Good morning. My name is Rachel Shipley,
And I'm Reagan Whiteley
and this is The Wolves.
by Sarah DeLapp.
So to begin our presentation this morning, we're going to take a deep dive into our playwright, Sarah DeLapp. She actually played soccer in her youth from ages 8 to 14, but she wasn't actually a very good soccer player, but she enjoyed the game and the relationships that she made with her teammates. She received her MFA from Brooklyn College, and she is really known for the emphasis that she places on the physicality of the characters in her writing. When she's writing her work, she asks herself the question, what are the actors doing with their body on the stage? And this is why she feels that sports translate well to the stage, and why she chose to incorporate soccer into the message that she was trying to get across to her audience. She's interested in highlighting the counterpoint between what the bodies are doing and what the actors are actually saying. So she's continuing her story through the physicality of the characters. And then at the bottom of the screen, you can see all the nominations and awards that The Wolves received after she wrote it in 2016.
Through her portrayal of young girls in The Wolves, Sarah DeLapp wanted to see a portrait of teenage girls as human beings, as complicated, nuanced, very idiocentric people who weren't just girlfriends or sex objects or manic pixie dream girls, but who were athletes and daughters and students and scholars and people who were trying actively to figure out who they were in this changing world around them.
Like anything else in this world, the writing of The Wolves has an origin story. And this origin story occurs way back in 2014 when our playwright, DeLappe, was in college getting her graduate degree. And so she is in New York City and she visits the new museum in 2014, and this is where inspiration strikes her. So there's a traveling exhibit inside the museum featuring these contemporary Middle Eastern artists. And as she's viewing these pieces of art, she can't help but notice this chasm of difference between the experience of the artists that is being portrayed through these paintings and the experiences of those who are surrounding her in New York City and Brooklyn, who are sucked into their phones or the media that's in Times Square. And so, following her visiting the museum, on her train ride back home to Brooklyn, she began writing The Wolves. And actually, on that train ride, she wrote the first scene of the show. And this sudden burst of inspiration lasted approximately 3 weeks, and the entirety of the play was written in that very short period of time.
Why soccer? As we've already talked about, DeLapp likes to ask herself when she's writing, what are the actors doing with their body? This is why she feels sports translates very well to the stage, because it allows you to have two layers of storytelling. You have a layer of storytelling through the dialogue, but also the actors can be saying something with their physical movement. And though this can be true in plays that don't involve sports, DeLapp argues that this purposeful physicality allows sports to translate well to stage because it highlights counterpoints between what the bodies are doing and what the actors could be actually saying.
This is a contemporary slice of life play. In The Wolves, a girls' indoor soccer team practices drills as they prepare for a succession of games. As they warm up and talk about life, the girls navigate the politics of their personal lives as well as the politics of the larger world, gossiping about things like war, menstrual products, genocide, sports, pop culture, and their relationships. Each team member struggles to negotiate her individuality while being a part of the group. They bond over a bag of orange slices and personal traumas. The team seems as if they may disband after the sudden death of one of the girls, but they manage to come together. In the end, the surviving team players prepare to play yet another game together. Closer, stronger, wiser, and fiercer.
So, Rachel, in this play, the playwright, Sarah DeLapp, put a Gertrude Stein quote at the very first page of the Wolves, and the quote is, "We are always the same age inside." What do you think this quote means in the relation to the play and to yourself?
I think The Wolves really explores the struggles of this coming into womanhood through periods, bullying, applying to college, boys and girls. Any woman can relate to this exploration of struggles and the growth found in these experiences, because this is a universal experience of the modern woman in some way or another. These experiences shape us and stay with us long after the sun sets on our adolescence. Reagan, all of the characters struggle in their own ways to fit in and to stand out. How does each girl distinguish herself while also being a good team player?
I think each player has very distinct and unique personality and traits, and they don't give that up as the play goes, and they stay to themselves, but at the same time, they're able to put some of those differences aside so they can come together as a team and really work together.
Yes, and I think it's also important to recognize that these players are struggling with a growing realization of world politics and world events, as well as the politics that exist in their own team structure.
That's a very good point. And also within the structure, each girl plays a very specific role in the team, and these roles can relate to the girls' status on the team and how they relate to each other as teammates and friends. And we see these statuses shift in the final scene of the play following the climax.
Right, and speaking of the climax, when one of the team members dies in a tragic accident, it's really important to recognize how the team deals with loss by continuing to play the game.
So within the dialogue of the show and how it's written, each character overlaps each other's at various different points in the show. That's because DeLapp views these sections as kind of a pseudo-musical orchestration, and that's why it's written this way in the script. For she sees each one of the characters as a different instrument. So she'll have a little bit of violin here, or a flourish of horns there, or a little triangle over there, and an oboe here with a little duet on the side, also while keeping the main piece continuous. So we have one column of uninterrupted text, coupled with short spurts of dialogue to the side, and so each voice will represent a different music instrument in this orchestration.
As we've learned this semester in dramatic analysis, it's important to analyze the social and political issues and events that were happening during the period in which things were written and released. So The Wolves was released in 2016, which coincided with one of the most controversial presidential elections in American history, the unexpected victory of Donald Trump over Hillary Clinton. This victory outraged and saddened many who objected to his past treatment and statements about women and minorities, as well as his controversial positions and rhetoric during his campaign. So, in response to his election on the first full day of his presidency, there was a Women's March on Washington, a massive protest in the nation's capital, largely aimed at the Trump administration and the perceived threat to it represented to civil and human rights in the United States of America.
The idea of the Women's March on Washington was set forth by a woman named Therese Shook when she voiced her opinion on Facebook about a reaction to Trump's victory. As many as 500,000 people showed up to the Capitol in response to his victory, and on the same day, millions more took place in sister marches in all 50 states and as many as 30 foreign countries. Though protesters who took part in the march voiced their opinion in support of various causes like women's rights and reproductive rights, criminal justice, defense of the environment, the rights of immigrants, Muslims, and people of the LGBT community, and the disabled, all of whom are seen as particularly vulnerable under the new administration.
So this is why it's so important for us to recognize these social and political issues in the time period, because the Wolves' portrayal of women helps fight against this marginalization of girls that was put at the forefront of social and political conversation because of the election of Donald Trump and the loss of Hillary Clinton in the United States election of 2016.
Now let's look at some music, film, and entertainment of the time, 2016. Let's start with The Phenomenon,
Beyoncé's Lemonade,
The Oscar,
Leonardo DiCaprio for The Revenant,
The Binge,
Stranger Things,
The Books,
My Brilliant Friend, and The Underground Railroad.
The Controversy,
Hashtag Oscars so white.
The Albums,
Drake's Views, and Kanye West's The Life of Pablo.
The Miniseries,
The Night Manger and The Night of.
The Song,
Closer by the Chainsmokers.
The Movie,
Moonlight.
The Traditional TV,
Westworld, and This Is Us.
The Broadway Sensation Continues,
Hamilton.
The Documentary,
13th.
The Breakout Stars,
Ruth Nagia, Riz Ahmed, Anaya Taylor-Joy, and Millie Bobby Brown.
The Museums,
The Met Bruyere and the Night Museum of African History and Culture.
The Reboots,
Bridget Jones, Ghostbusters, Gilmore Girls, and Rogue One.
The Tour,
Adele Live 2016.
The Return of,
Harry Potter.
and The OJ Factor.
The People versus O.J. Simpson and O.J. Made in America. Hey, Reagan, we can't forget about female soccer in films from previous decades, right?
Of course not. Movies like 10 Things I Hate About You,
Switching Goals.
She's the Man,
Bend It Like Beckham all feature females playing soccer.
Now let's talk about fashion trends and hairstyles of 2016. Things like
chokers,
tour merch,
velvet,
off-the-shoulder everything,
old school logos,
slip dresses,
millennial pink,
and vintage fit denim.
And we can't forget hair. We have freshly washed glunge hair,
embellished hair,
wide satin bands,
just one night hair,
blowouts,
natural hair,
soft pop colors,
bleach blonde,
and lived-in highlights.
Hair, makeup, and penalty kicks. For the first time in history, we have a large mass of women and girls who play sports. So, for a long time, the visual narrative around women in sports has been much more pretty in pink, and leagues and organizations in charge of women's sports work to portray women athletes as more ladylike and more feminine to make their athleticism more palatable to men and others. So they chose femininity, as you can see in the picture where they're wearing skirts, over function and practicality of the fashion.
Because of this historical struggle between femininity and athleticism, if a player chooses to forego makeup and wear their hair short, ignoring the conventional notions of femininity, they're labeled as too masculine. But if they choose to use makeup or wear colorful ponytails and be creative with their look when playing, they're ridiculed for that too, because they're not concentrating on the athleticism of the sport. So this plight of the female athlete is universal, and it affects women all over the world.
So why is one's look in soccer so important? According to Dutch player Van den Sanden, she loves to play soccer, but she also enjoys looking good, to have nice makeup on and have nice outfits. That means something to her too.
And when we look at production photos of the Wolves from across the nation and across the world, we see these iconic soccer looks. We see the pixie cut of Megan Rapinoe, and the pre-wrap and ponytail made popular by Alex Morgan, and the iconic bun and pre-wrap of Carly Lloyd, and even hair bows and braids that are seen in both recreational soccer and club soccer and international play.
Now that we've discussed the time period surrounding the Wolves and when it was released and the impact on the play, let's talk about where the playwright in the play is today. DeLapp is currently working as a writer and an executive producer on an animated adaptation of the comic Beverly. Her only play she's written so far is The Wolves, but it continues to be produced by large theater companies across the world and internationally since its release in 2016.
So, as we draw our presentation to a close, we're going to talk about why this story is so relevant to both women's soccer and women in theater. So actually the U.S. women's soccer team is in the middle of a lawsuit that began in 2015 regarding the disparities between the pay of the U.S. women's international team and the U.S. men's international team. And you can kind of see those disparities laid out in the diagram on this slide. But I think it's really important to recognize the pay gap that exists even in sports, even though the U.S. women's team actually wins more games and performs at a higher level than the U.S. men's international team.
Now let's talk about female representation in theater. Men outnumber women by at least 2-1 in fields all across theater and on Broadway, even though women make up 67% of Broadway audiences. The question of why women playwrights are underrepresented in American theater is interesting, especially because theaters are not required by law to produce male and female playwrights equally, nor are they required to hire any female directors at all. These issues often trickle down all the way from Broadway to plays performed in schools and public theaters. And a survey in 2016 found that the top 10 plays and musicals performed in schools across the country were created predominantly by not only men, but white men.
But don't worry, there are movements towards effective change happening in this area of theater. The Kilroy's Advocacy Group was founded in 2013, and it is a collective of women in theater that have dedicated themselves and their careers to the increased visibility of the female playwright. Every year, they release a list of plays written by female-identified individuals, and it is compiled for theaters and schools to consult as a resource when making decisions about what plays to produce in their seasons.
So, Rachel, how about some final thoughts? I'll go first. I really love this show and what it does for female representation both on and off the stage, and also that each girl deals with things differently and we all just are normal.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I really love the complexity of the characters in the script, and it's definitely a project that I would love to work on in the future, either as a technician, designer, or an actor. Make sure to check out our Works Cited page if you want to learn anything further about what we discussed in our presentation. And just to leave you with one final thought,